In an interview with the Financial Times, Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner, when asked about nurses' pay, said that a Labour government would not give an inflation-matching pay rise. As you can see on the screen, this is a quote from the Financial Times' Jim Pickard. What would be the biggest priorities for an incoming Starmer government? Labour would borrow an extra £28 billion a year for capital investment, Rayner points out. Elsewhere, there will be fiscal restraint. Would a Labour government succumb to union pressure to give public sector workers inflation-matching pay rises of 10%? Rayner's response? Brutally, no, but we would strengthen the unions and have good employment rights. Curtis, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, mentioned budget restraints and quite clearly said no to an inflation-matching pay rise for nurses. What are your thoughts?
So the line from the front bench, the line from Keir Starmer, whenever he's asked about would you support these demands, he kind of sidesteps the issue and just says, well, what we want to do is, as in power, is to get the unions around the table and kind of sort of sit it out, right? And some people in the defense of this line is like, well, yeah, true. Like they're not going to try and get too specific on pay, but they will support getting around the table, right? The reason why that's crap is because, this would work if this was the private sector. Right, a Labour government can't really be like, right, okay, well, we're going to set the wage of a private company. Mm-hmm. That's not how it works, right? Because this is the NHS and it's a somewhat publicly owned entity, right? The government is the employer here. So actually, they have a direct say and direct power on how much nurses are paid. It's like if you're a worker at JD Sports and there was a union with the workers and said, look, we want these demands. And JD Sports said, we support your right to make these demands, but we're not going to give in to these demands. We're going to sit this one out. But you're the one that's paying us, so it's yes or no. The government pays the nurses. So that answer is utter rubbish. You either support their demands or you don't.
Mm-hmm. There's no in between.
There's no in between. Now, if I remember correctly, the last Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, and obviously this is way before the inflation spike, I believe, and I'll double check, I'm pretty sure they supported a 5% increase in pay, right? Which is actually the exactly same thing what the nurses are asking. Mm-hmm. Because some, I'd say, right-wing media organisations, especially like those on GB News, are saying, oh, the nurses want a 17 to 18% pay rise. That's misleading, right? They want a 5% pay rise with inflation included. So, you add the inflation of 11%, 12%, plus the pay rise. So it's not a 20% pay rise. They've had an 11% pay cut. Mm-hmm. Restore the pay cut.
They want to be, matched to inflation and then add 5% on top.
Yeah. So when Angela Rayner said, no, we can't really do this, but we support unions. Well, how do you support unions if you're not going to get accept their demands?
that was my thought. Yeah. And how can you say you're going to strengthen unions and give good employment rights when you're also saying, no, we're not going to match wage to match inflation? They're literally, that's a complete conflicting sentence, and it doesn't make any sense, because surely the unions are going to say, this is what we want. You're going to turn around and say, no, that's not strengthening the unions, that's going against the unions.
At the very least, they could, because they don't have a policy on nurses' pay at the moment, which by now they should. And even if the policy they came up with isn't quite as high as what the demand is, they can at least say, right, our policy in government is nurses will get a 3% pay rise immediately. Mm-hmm. We understand that that's not quite the demands of the unions. However, once we're in government and we've implemented this 3% pay rise, we'll look at it again. We'll look at the state of the economy and see if we could do better. At least that's a bit more of a concrete answer. And it also does say, all right, well, we don't know the state of the economy, and obviously the Conservatives have completely fucked it up. Because they're too scared to commit to anything right now.
That is a good point, because she's just gone brutally no. And but we're going to have good relationships with unions and whatever workers' rights. But she's not, she's not giving any compromise. No, we're not going to be able to match inflation. I know that's not the answer that everyone wants. However, we will increase it by X amount. And then, like you just said, when we're then in power, or once we've got a better handle on the economy, we will review it, and we will continue to review it. It's just been a flat no.
And in terms of just simple communication, everyone's going to look at the bit where she says brutally no.
Yeah,
that is the main
focus
of the
sentence.
That's the start of the sentence. People are going to look at that. So from a communication standpoint, that's awful.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what comes after that sentence because she just started it with brutally no.
If you look, those in the unions, the nurses, right? You want their vote as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Surely by saying vote for us and you will get this specific payment immediately, at least nurses are like, well, they've got my vote. And other people who support nurses can at least say, well, I know the difference now between the Labour and the Tories. But both of them are just like, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just offer something tangible, even if you don't want to pay them 5%. Just offer something for now, whether it's slightly lower, and then they can say they can look at it again.
Because otherwise,
that's what I would do if I was them.
What is the difference between the Labour government and a Tory government if they're both basically offering the same thing and that's nothing?
Yeah.
And on that, obviously, you believe that if Labour got in, there would be a version of austerity.
Yeah.
How different or similar would it be to like the Tories' version of austerity, do you think?
Okay, well, back in 2015, under Ed Miliband, when they were offering austerity, the choice was austerity hard with the Conservatives or austerity light with Labour. So both political parties were supporting austerity. It was quite clear that Labour wouldn't cut quite as much. Still not good enough, but we know that. Right now, it's not so clear. We've had, with Boris Johnson, he's ditched austerity and he's, intervened in the economy in a really, really significant way, especially furlough. The government spent a lot of money, and rightly so. We need the furlough.
Mm-hmm.
Boris Johnson isn't a neoliberal at heart. He was willing to do what was needed to be done. There was lots of issues with furlough, but no one can really argue. Well, some people do, but most people can't really argue it's a bad thing. But all that time, Keir Starmer was talking about fiscal competency, where they're getting their money from. And they were using the rhetoric, without outright saying austerity, but they're using a lot of the rhetoric of austerity. So we had a position where the Labour Party were to the right economically on the Conservatives, which is insane. And right now, we are unsure, because Rishi Sunak is going to implement austerity. He's a neoliberal hardcore, right? The Labour Party are talking about austerity, so we know both parties are going to offer austerity. But the difference between 2015 and Ed Miliband is that we don't know if Labour are going to do more or less or the same.
And we are in a completely different financial, economic environment now. Obviously, they're saying this is going to be
no excuse for the Labour Party to be talking about austerity, and it's no excuse, especially to give off the message that we don't know who's going to cut more, Labour or the Tories.
Yeah, that's not very reassuring. Yeah. But obviously, a lot of experts and stuff have said this is going to be the worst longest recession we've ever seen, and that's very worrying. But yeah, it's also worrying to not know which government is going to give us a better outcome.
The thing with financial markets, what they want the most is stability and confidence. So they're not necessarily asking all governments to implement austerity. They're not actually bothered which way the government goes, whether the government wants to borrow to invest or whether they want to implement austerity. The financial market's we don't care which way you go. What matters is stability. So the reason why, in terms of Liz Truss, why she spooked the markets is because she came up with this policy of unfunded tax cuts, obviously during the cost of living crisis, bang, like that. That spooked the markets, and obviously that's where they lost confidence. Now, it wasn't even the policy itself, it was the way it was done, because there's been countless times where governments have cut taxes for the rich and the markets haven't been spooked, but they knew what they were doing. On the flip side, is ironic as it may seem that Jeremy Corbyn's party was a very anti-establishment party taking on the rich. They had, and especially John McDonnell, had very good conversations with the City of London, because they basically said, this is what we're going to do in government. We are going to raise your taxes to spend, but we're not going to spook you. We're not going to we're not going to come up with policies that aren't funded. Just so you know, you will get your taxes raised, but this is what's going to happen. And a lot of the markets responded not too bad to that. They were like, well, that's stability. We know what you're doing with that. So it doesn't matter that whoever wins the next election or going forward, the policy of austerity doesn't need to happen. It's a political choice. As long as you approach the markets a bit more with ease, explain it to them a bit more, have a plan, rather than just go in.
Wow. I don't even know what to think, what to say. We'll
Basically,
just
the
watch
point
this
is-
space.
The point is, austerity, as always, is a political choice. When you hear Keir Starmer say stuff like, "Well, we don't know the state of the economy, therefore we can't really implement these policies. We can't spend this amount of money because we're in the state of the economy," that's utter bullcrap. It's not that the state of the economy dictates what policies you do. It's the way you go around it. If you have radical redistributive policies, but they're funded, you make that clear, you can still get your way out of this. Because we've been in essentially a permanent recession since 2008. We never really recovered from that. The reason why we haven't recovered from that is because we've done the same policies of austerity. Cut. And you realise what happens. Chaos ensues. People can't afford bills. People can't afford their mortgage. And there's less stability. Businesses are losing out on customers because they can't afford to buy stuff. We went the wrong way. We should have heavily invested in 2008. We should have treated the response to the banking crisis as we did in World War II. Many countries were in debt. The UK, I think it was 250% of GDP of debt. That's GDP ratio, something like that. We were in a massive lot of debt. But Clement Attlee didn't cut everything. He said, no, I'm going to spend fucking loads of money to rebuild the country, create the NHS and the welfare state. And that's when we had the best economic period for decades. We should have done the same thing with 2008. And we should be doing this now in response to what's happening. But that's not going to happen. And Keir Starmer's not going to do that either. But it just needs to be made clear that the decisions of austerity and cuts and being restrained and careful is not... it's not in economic reality. It's just ideological.